How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chaf Aleph, Daf 21. Masechta Avodah Zarah, friends. Oh, Givalda, great. Okay, so Daf Chaf Aleph. I think it's a good Daf, right? Let's see, what is it talking about? Oh, wait, oops. Where are you? Okay. Right. Selling property. Okay, so today Be'etzim talks about, so we're going to start a new Mishnah. I had a half a minute to finish the parak, but I think I'm going to say that for tomorrow. It just kind of gets into a new sugya at the end. I figured, okay, we'll start with that tomorrow. Um, Anyways, but we're going to learn a new Mishnah on today's daf about selling property to. So this one I don't think is necessarily a reference to pagans per se. I think this might actually just be a reference to non-Jewish people, Jewish people selling property to non-Jewish people. In Israel, outside of Israel, in a place called Surya, which has its own kind of status, which we will discuss. And so, yeah, that is kind of today's daf. Interesting stuff. Here we go. All right, we're going to start on daf Chaf Amud Beis, daf Chaf Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom at the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Ein maskirin loyim botim be'eretz Yisrael, vein tzarich lomar sodis. Okay. So first of all, this Mishnah is a machloikes Reb Meir and Reb Yossi. Okay, so this right now is the opinion of Reb Meir, Tanakama, of course. So this is the opinion of Reb Meir. So now, okay, as we learned yesterday, right, lo schanem, right, lo sitin leim chanoya ba'arith, right. So a yid wouldn't sell property to a non-yid in Eretz Yisrael. Now. Okay, so now you can't sell a property. What about renting it out? If you still own it, but you're merely renting it out. So Reb Meir's opinion is that renting it out is not okay because it's a gezerah, out of concern that if you rent it out, then there might lead to situations where it ends up being where you end up selling to an oved kochavim. I'm just going to say oved kochavim, even though I don't think it necessarily means pagan here. Now, okay, so according to Reb Meir, there is a gezerah when it comes to renting, just to make sure, if you rent, then you might end up coming to sell, so don't rent. And then it says, and it goes without saying, right, that was a house, it goes without saying, ooh, why am I bleeding? What could I possibly have done to be bleeding? Yeah, okay, the Rebbeinu Shalom will take care of me. Anyways, so, and then it says, it goes without saying fields, okay? And because, okay, the Gemara is going to explain why, when it comes to fields, it goes without saying. But the assumption is going to be throughout, both according to Meir and according to Reb Yossi, that fields has a kind of more stringent status than houses do. And the Gemara will explain why. Now, says the Mishnah, Ein maskirin loim botim be'eretz Yisrael. So we do not even rent out homes to Ovdei Kochavim in Eretz Yisrael. And certainly not fields. Okay, again, the issue is selling it. This is all out of concern that we want to make sure you don't end up selling, so we say don't even rent. Now, what about Surya? Surya, which I think is Be'etzim Syria, I don't know if it's like all of modern day Syria, but I think it's the land to the north of Eretz Yisrael. Now, King David conquered Surya. And the shaila is, the Gemara is going to talk about, we've seen this before, kibush yochid shmei kibush or not, right? The fact that King David conquered this area, does that, interesting, is that upside down? Maybe. Okay, upside down's okay. Okay. The fact that King David conquered this area, does that actually make it part of Eretz Yisrael or not? The Gemara is going to kind of talk about this, but for now, let's just flag it as kind of like a disputed kind of territory. Maskirin loem botim. So in Surya, we can rent out properties. We still wouldn't sell properties in Surya, but you could rent it out. Avalo sados, but not fields. Fields are more stringent. We're going to hold that there. No renting out of fields in Surya, but you can rent out houses in Surya, but not sell. Uvechutz mamish, in America. So mochin loim batum maskirin sados. So in America, there's. Oh wait. Oh, so one second. So in America, mochin loim batum, we could sell property, but still only maskirin sados. Interesting. Still, when it comes to fields, we're only going to rent out fields, even in chutzlarts, and not sell them. Divrei Meir, that is the opinion of Meir. Rabbi Yossi kind of pushes everything up one step, right? So whereas Rabbi Meir had said, no, you can't even rent out a house in Eretz Yisrael out of concern that you might sell it. Rabbi Yossi says, no, of course you can't sell the house in Eretz Yisrael, but you can rent it out. That's fine. But when it comes to fields, you wouldn't rent it out because fields are more stringent. So let's see. So like each thing basically, Rabbi Yossi is like one step more lenient. So Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi be'eretz Yisrael maskir lehem botim. That in Eretz Yisrael you can rent out houses. That's fine. You can't sell, but you can rent. It's okay. Avalo sadis, but we're more stringent when it comes to fields. We would not rent out fields in Eretz Yisrael to an oved kochavim. Uve Surya, and in this Surya land, mochin botim, we can sell houses. In Surya, you can sell a home, umaskirin sados, and you can rent out a field, but not sell a field. V'chutz la'aretz mochin elevelu. And in America, you can sell your fields, sell your homes, whatever you want, to ovdei kochavim. Now, you could sell both things, fields and homes. And now, and even in the places where renting out is allowed, nonetheless, you can't rent out a property to an oved kochavim. So this is dafka actually. So this would dafka be for ovdei kochavim, not just for non-Jewish people, but dafka idolaters. Right? That and even in places where you can rent out your property to your home to ovdei kochavim, not for them to live in it, but just for them to kind of store things in it, because if they live in it, then they're going to bring in the getchkes, and we don't want that, right? As it says, don't bring abominations into your home. And in all places, Eretz Yisrael, Surya, Chutz La'aretz, lo yaskir lo es hamerchotz, do not rent out a bathhouse. And this, I assume, is just referring to a non-Jewish person, because if you own, it says lo yaskir, right? If you own the bathhouse, but you're renting it out to an oved kochavim, again, I think that this just refers to somebody who's not Jewish, to kind of, you're kind of renting it out to the oved kochavim, and he's renting it, he's doing it, and he's going to run it on Shabbos as well, right? So therefore, since you own it, people are going to say, oh, that's Reuven's, that's Reuven's bathhouse, and it's open on Shabbos, and people are going to say, wait, why is Reuven's bathhouse open on Shabbos? So therefore, if you own a bathhouse, do not rent it out to ovdei kochavim. Now, says the Gemara, "My ein tzarich lomar sados." Oh, okay, so why are we treating fields more stringently than we are treating homes? So, Elim, if you say mishum de isba tarte, if you say because it has two things. What are the two things that has chada chanoyas karka? Well, one, you can't sell a field because, as we said, l'suchanim, lo sitan lem chanoyas karka, don't give them property, right, to encamp in the land, to settle into the land. And also, when a yid owns the property, then the yid separates trumis and masris, mitzvahs atluyas ba'aretz. If you sell it to an oved kochavim, so then there's no longer going to be trumis and masris. So by selling a field to an oved kochavim, so then there's kind of two repercussions, two consequences, outcomes. One is that los chonem, right? You don't want to, right? So you don't want to give them an encampment in the land. And number two, if it was owned by a yid and now it's going to be transferred to an Oved Chacham, there's not going to be Trumas and Meister separated anymore, and there's not, and you being Mavatam mitzvahs Tluis Baritz. Okay, meaning there will be no longer those mitzvahs Tluis Baritz. Now, Yehochi, if that's the case, bottom namis. Now says the Gemara interestingly, but can't I make the same argument or a similar argument when it comes to homes? Why are homes less stringent, more lenient? There's of course still lo sitin lem chanoya, right? Right? Yehochi bottom nami ikatar techad chanoyas karka, right? By homes, if you sell your home to nove kochavim, there, right? There's the question of there's the mitzvahs lo yisasev lo schonim, and also. Isn't that an interesting shaila? That when the yid owns the home, there's a mezuzah on the doorpost. When the yid sells it to the Oved Kochavim, the mezuzah is taken down. So you're being mevatel the house from the mitzvah of mezuzah. So and for the Gemara, Omer of Mishar mezuzah chovas ador who. Now that's an interesting teretz, that the mezuzah is actually not a din in the, it's not a din in the chetzah, the din in the gavra. It's not, it's not that the house needs a mezuzah. No. The person who lives in the house needs to, it's on him to put on the mezuzah. Ooh. Okay. So therefore, you're talking not being mevatel the house from the mitzvah of mezuzah. The house doesn't have the mitzvah of mezuzah. The yid who lives in the house. So anyways, so yeah, by selling the house, there's the issue of los chonem, but mezuzah is not a factor here. Oh, shtickle geschmack over there. Surya maskirin bottom chule. Now we're gonna discuss Surya a little bit. In Surya, in Surya. Maskirin loim bottom. What does that mean? So in Surya, it's kind of like one step down, okay? So whereas in Eretz Yisrael, we don't even rent out homes, because we're concerned if you rent it, you might end up selling it. In Surya, we could be a little bit more lenient and say that you could rent out homes in Surya. Still don't sell, but you could rent. And when it comes to the fields, you can't rent out the fields. The fields we're more stringent over there, as we just explained, because there's the two things going for it. Los chonim as well as trumas and bittul trumas and meisus. Now, ma'ishna mechira deloi. Now, in Surya, how come you can't sell a property to an Oved Chacham in Surya? How come you can't sell a property? If it's not Eretz Yisrael, why not sell it? So, well, because we're concerned, well, if you could sell it in Surya, you might end up selling in Eretz Yisrael, so don't sell, just rent. But then the Gemara asks, but then let's say that you shouldn't be able to rent it out either, because after all, we said that in Eretz Yisrael, you can't rent out your house to an Oved Kochavim. So if we're saying that in Surya, don't sell your house to an Oved Kochavim, because we're concerned if you sell your house to an Oved Kochavim in Surya, you might sell your house to an Oved Kochavim in Eretz Yisrael. Well, then we should make the same gzera against renting out in Surya as well. How come? Well, because if you rent out your house in Surya, you might rent out your house in Eretz Yisrael. We said you're not allowed to rent out your house to an Oved Kochavim in Eretz Yisrael. So, and for the Gemara, no. He gufa gzera, v'ona nekum, v'nigzer gzera, ligzera. Because after all, to begin with, renting out your property, or the lack of, or the prohibition against renting out one's property to an Oved Kochavim in Eretz Yisrael is itself a gzera. Technically, there's nothing wrong with renting out a property to an Oved Kochavim in Eretz Yisrael. It's out of concern that, well, if you rent it, you might end up selling it. So therefore, to say that even in Surya, don't rent out your property, because if you rent out your property in Surya, then you might end up renting out in Eretz Yisrael, which in and of itself is actually okay, but don't do that, because then you might end up doing the wrong thing, which is selling it. Meaning, right, don't rent out in Surya, because then you might rent out in Eretz Yisrael, which in and of itself is only so you don't sell in Eretz Yisrael. So it's too far removed, right? We make gezeros, we make checks, I guess. We make guardrails against doing something usher, but we don't need to make guardrails against doing something that it in of itself is just a guardrail for something else. No, we're not making a gzera for a gzera. We're making a gzera for the real thing, not for a guardrail. All right. So where are we? So where am I? So schir is not minhag. You make the same thing about schirus in Surya, because then you might rent it out in Eretz Yisrael. No, but he gufa gzera. No, renting out in Eretz Yisrael, which we're trying to prevent, is in and of itself a gezerah, only so that you don't end up selling in Eretz Yisrael. On a nekum v'nigzer gezerah lig gezerah, we're going to make another gezerah, not to rent in Surya, so that you don't violate renting in Eretz Yisrael, which is in and of itself a guardrail. No, we're not going to do that. So therefore, you can rent out a house in Surya. V'ha schirus sadeh de besurya gezerah ligzerahi of the kogas vinon. Now, fact the Gemara an interesting kasha. Who can tell me what the Gemara's kasha is? The Gemara's kasha is that, well, according to Reb Meir, he says you could rent out a home in Surya, but not a field. Why not? Why can't you rent out a field in Surya? Is it not because, well, if you rent out a field in Surya, you might end up renting out a field in Eretz Yisrael. And if you rent out a field in Eretz Yisrael, you might end up selling a field in Eretz Yisrael. So it sounds like when it comes to the field, though, we are making a gezerah l'gzerah, because Reb Meir says you can't even rent out a field to Novei Gechom in Surya. And that would, of course, be because then you might rent it out in Eretz Yisrael, which means that then you might end up selling it in Eretz Yisrael. So we are making a gezerah l'gzerah, a guardrail for what is already a guardrail. The Kagazrin, and we're making the gezerah hasam lav gezerah hu. So actually, when it comes to Surya, it isn't actually a gezerah. You know why? Kasover kibush yochid shmei kibush. Aha. So actually, Reb Meir holds that kibush yochid shmei kibush. That when King David conquered Surya, it's now part of Eretz Yisrael. Now, there's an interesting shayla about Kiddush Rishon and Kitchul Shayla, Kitchul Lava. That imagine that plays a role. But at least during the time of the Beis Hamikdash, so it's an interesting shayla when these things apply, at least vis-a-vis Surya. Oh, also an interesting shayla. Interesting shayla. Kedusha. Okay, I'm sure we can go deeper. I'm sure there's a whole big sugya about selling property in Eretz Yisrael. I'm sure that goes deeper than just, well, this Gemara might be the sort of the launch point for it. But anyways, I don't want to get caught up in that. But however, says Reb Meir that actually when King David annexed Surya, so it actually became part of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore there's actually, technically speaking now, actually no distinction between Eretz Yisrael and Surya. It's all Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, when Reb Meir says, do not rent out your field in Surya, do not rent out your field in Surya, it's actually out of concern that you might end up selling your field in Surya, and that would actually be a problem, because Surya is actually part of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, well, if that's the case, then why are you allowed to rent out your house in Surya? Aren't we concerned that you might then sell your house in Surya? So where am I? So okay, because over kibush yochid shmei kibush. So that the is bay tied to goes berabanon, bottom place we tied to the goes berabanon. So interestingly, what does Rashi say? Interesting. I mean, Rashi doesn't really go into too much detail there, but it seems that, I don't know, I guess the point is that, yes, King David captured Surya, and annexed it. And then Surya becomes part of Israel. But even so, according to Reb Meir, the Chacham didn't feel the need to make a gezerah against renting out homes when it comes to Surya. I don't know necessarily why, because it's part of Eretz Yisrael. Shouldn't we be concerned that you're going to sell it? For some reason, they were less concerned when they were less stringent when it came to Surya, nonetheless. However, when it comes to a field in Surya, where we said it's more stringent, because it's got the double things, los chonim as well as trumas and maasros, so we say don't rent out the field in Surya. Okay, Givaldi, because we don't want you to end up selling it. Fine. Okay, where are we now? We're up to Rabbi Yossi already? Oh, Givaldi. Wait, what? We're already up to Rabbi Yossi? Okay, good. So I make sure. No, we're not. I thought I was skipping. Okay. And when it comes to chutzlarts, says Reb Meir, you can sell homes in chutzlarts and rent out fields. So that the izbe tarte gazubu rabbanon, that still, even though it's chutzlarts, when it comes to fields where in Eretz Yisrael there's two concerns of los chonim and trumas and maasros, so even in chutzlarts, don't sell fields, just rent them out. Bottom delezbu tarte gazubu rabbanon, but homes where there's only one concern of los chonim, in chutzlarts you can actually sell a home to an oved kochalim. Rabbi Yossi Omer says Rabbi Yossi be'eretz Yisrael maskir la'im batim v'chulei. Oh, so now Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Even in Eretz Yisrael, you can rent out homes. We're not concerned that, well, if you rent it, you might sell it. No, even in Eretz Yisrael, you can rent out homes. Fields, don't rent out. So where are we? Find my timer. So how come fields you cannot rent out? Houses you could rent out of the Kov, but not fields. So there's this Butarte goes Burabonim, because fields that have the double concern, so there's a Gzera not to rent them out. Bottom delays Butarte goes Burabonim, but homes where there's only the lone concern of Los Chonim, so by homes, it's only one concern, so he said, you could rent them out, it's okay. Fine. With Surya, says Rabbi Yossi, that when it comes to Surya, mochrin v'chulei, you can sell homes and you could rent out fields. So interesting, he's saying you could sell homes in Surya. So it must be that he holds that Surya is not part of Eretz Yisrael. My time outcome. So v'kibush yochid lo shmei kibush. Because Rabbi Yossi holds that the conquest of King David, that the capturing of King David did not actually make it part, the annexation of King David did not actually make it part of Eretz Yisrael, and therefore Surya is not part of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore you can sell a home. But again, fields that in Eretz Yisrael there are two concerns, los chonim as well as trumas and maasros. So by fields, even in Surya, we still make a gezerah. We say don't sell fields, but you can rent them out. But homes where there's only one concern, there's no gezerah at all in Surya because it's not actually part of Eretz Yisrael, and you can sell homes of the kochavim there. Uvechutzlaretz mochen v'chulei, and in chutzlaretz, says Rabbi Yossi, you can sell homes, you can sell fields. There are no concerns. My time outcome came in the mirachik lo gozrin, and since chutzlaretz is far, right? America is far away from Eretz Yisrael. You think that they knew about America during the time of the Tanarim and the Morim? Like, did anybody ever like travel to America, or was that only like 1,000 years later with Columbus? Or who went first, Columbus or Amerigo Vespucci? When was Amerigo Vespucci? What was that? Like I feel like Amerigo Vespucci, was that even his name? I feel like that was his name, or it's close to that. Social studies. Wait, what's social studies? Wait, was social studies, was that more of like the Native American stuff? I don't know. What was social? Wasn't there seen social studies in history? I feel like when you become in like 5th grade, it becomes, maybe 6th grade, it becomes history. Anyways, Amerigo Vespucci, when was that guy? He must have been like the 1300s. Should I look him up? Let's look him up. Amerigo Vespucci. Let's see. Amerigo Vespucci. Vespucci or Vespucci? All right, internet, this is not the time to be slow. This is not the time to be slow. The people are waiting. Oh, all right, I'm not doing this. Oh, here it is. No? Why is the internet being slow? All right. Ma, the internet's being slow. All right, forget about it. Anyways, I think he was before Columbus. All right. Now, yeah, so did they like know about what did they know? Did they know about America? What did they know about? Let's go weiter. So, given the Merachik logos in Omer, since it's far away, we're not concerned about anything. You could sell homes, you could sell fields. Fine. Omer Vido Meshmuel Aloche Kreb Yossi. Says Vido Meshmuel Aloche Kreb Yossi. Of course, Aloche Kreb Yossi. We always pass on Kreb Yossi. Machlokes are made Kreb Yossi. Of course, pass on Kreb Yossi. Kreb Yossi Nimuka Imo. Of course, seen it a few times. Omer of Yosef says of Yosef Uvavachli Asen Shchune. However, nonetheless, even in Chutzlar, it says of Yosef, don't make a whole community of Ovdei Kochavim like idolaters, because you don't want to have a whole matzav of idolatry going on. They'll pull you, it become a mess. They could become issues with the relations with them. Don't make a community of them. How much is a community? Tano in Shchuna Pchusa Mishlosha, at least 3 bnei Adam. At least 3 people makes a Shchuna. But one second, but maybe if a Yidala sells his house to an Ovid Kichovim, and then he goes and splits the property into 3 and sells it to 2 others, he sold it to 1, but ended up becoming 3. And for the Gemara, Rabbi, alifne mipakdinan, alifne delifne lo mipakdinan. Interestingly, this is not to be taken literally. Right? Usually, lifnei iver losita michshol is like an actual aver, right? Selling a sheep to an ovid kochavim when they're nechshodan ala revia, so there's an actual issue there, right? If I sell my sheep to an ovid kochavim, we might end up doing an isser with it. Lifnei iver losita michshol. Here, there's no actual isser, right? Meaning that, well, if I sell my home to one ovid kochavim, maybe I'll sell it to 3, and you're not supposed to sell it to 3. Like there isn't a deliberate kind of like isser there, but. The point is, like, right? What does Rashi say? Rashi says, meaning it's a borrowed term here. That meaning it's too far removed. We're not so concerned, right? Alifne mipakdinon, alifne delifne lo mipakdinon. Right? We're not gonna get right. Toisvis also says, right? Simona ba'almo. It's just it's a phrase over here, not to be taken literally. But the point is, we don't want to get far-fetched. And even in places where they said that you can rent out a home, don't rent it out for living, because then they're gonna bring in their getchkes, and we don't want that. Well, if we're saying that even in places where you can rent out your home, that implies that there are places where you cannot rent out your home. Now, according to Reb Yossi, you can always rent out your home. Even in Eretz Yisrael, you can rent out your home. So therefore, V'stamak Reb Meir, this would be like Reb Meir di Reb Yossi b'chol duchta mugri, because if we're talking about Reb Meir, he says even in Eretz Yisrael, you can rent out your home. So this statement is davka according to, that's actually interesting though. He says V'stamak Reb Meir, which is actually interesting. Like, is it trying to say like we paskin like Reb Meir? But we just said that we paskin like Reb Yossi. But anyways, the Mishnah, the unattributed part of the Mishnah there is like Reb Meir. Fine. Interesting shaila. What does it mean with the stomach, Reb Meir? Okay, fine. Now, the Mishnah concluded by saying that regardless of where you are, even in America, if you own a bathhouse, do not rent it out to an Arvei Kochavim, like a year lease or something, and then he runs the place. He manages it himself. Tanya Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, right? And then the Mishnah said, because, right, what was the Mishnah say? Mipleishu nikra al shmo, right? Because if the Yid owns it, people are associated with the Yid, right? And they're going to see that it's open on Shabbos, and they're going to say, wait, why is Ruvain's bathhouse? That's like a good name for a bathhouse. Ruvain's bathhouse. Talk a good name. That's a solid name. That's a solid name for a bathhouse. Ruvain's bathhouse. Sheesh. That's good. Anyways, so okay, because people are going to associate with Reuven. They're like, why is Reuven's bathhouse open on Shabbos? Now, Tani will learn about Reb Shimon Gamliel, Mrs. Reb Shimon Gamliel lo yiskor Adam par Yaskir. What's that? Yaskir. Okay, say it. Reb Shimon Yaskir Adam merchatzoi leovid kirchavim. So a person should not rent out his bathhouse to an ovid kirchavim. Because it's people associated with the owner, the Yid, Reuven. Let's call him. And the Ovid Kochavim, is not Jewish. He's gonna have the bathhouse open. He's gonna keep it open on Shabbos and Yom Tif, and we don't want that. Aval akusi my shari. But what about a kusi? Right, of course, a kusi is a questionable yid. They converted, but for ulterior motives. Ulterior motives. And it was, what about renting it out to a kusi shari? Taka, it is permitted because the kusim would respect Shabbos. What does Rashi say? Kusi lo avin melacha b'Shabbos. He's not going to do melacha on Shabbos. The Medrash from Lochashi, but he will do melacha on Chol HaMoed. So Eimer Ovid be melacha b'chol HaShamayit. But shouldn't we be concerned that the kusi is going to leave the bathhouse open on Chol HaMoed? But b'chol HaShamayit on anami abdina. Yeah, but we also go to the bathhouse and warm up water for the bathhouse on Chol HaMoed. So that's not a problem. So therefore, when it comes to a bathhouse, it can be rented out to a kusi because he won't be there on Shabbos or Yom Tif. He'll be there on Chol HaMoed, but that's okay. So you can rent it out to a kusi, but not to a Ovid Kochavim, because the Ovid Kochavim will be there on Shabbos and Yom Tif, and since the Yid still owns it, it'll be associated with him, so we don't want that. Avo Sadeyu le'Ovid Kochavim. But when it comes to a field, it's taka fakert. A field is taka fakert. You can rent out, now not in Eretz Yisrael, but like in Chutz La'aretz, for example, you could rent out your field to an Oved Kochavim. You could rent out your field to an Oved Kochavim in Chutz La'aretz, but not to a kusi. My shari, where am I? Aval sadeh lo Kochavim, my shari. Right, so we said you cannot rent out your bathhouse to an Oved Kochavim, but you can rent out your field to an Oved Kochavim. My time outcome, Arisa Arisuse Ka'ovid. Because if people see in Oved Kochavim in the field on Shabbos, right, so it's Reuven's field, and they see Christopher work in the field on Shabbos, so they'll say, oh, okay, why is Christopher on Reuven's field on Shabbos? He's not working for Reuven. He's a sharecropper. And a sharecropper basically has an arrangement with the Baal HaBayis. The arrangement is the sharecropper is responsible for the field. He works the field, and the arrangement is a certain percentage of the crop will go to the Baal HaBayis, but ultimately the sharecropper is autonomous on the land. He works the land as if it's his, and the deal is he gives part of it, but he's working the land because he wants the land to succeed so that he could make, he can have more stuff. So therefore, when people see Christopher on the land on Shabbos, they'll say, okay, he's a sharecropper, he's working for himself. But why don't we say the same thing by the bathhouse? Reuven's bathhouse, it's rented out to Christopher, and Christopher's running it on Shabbos. Why don't we say, Christopher must be a sharecropper in the bathhouse? So, where am I? Merchatz nami, ami arisa risusa kavod. Arisa de merchatz lo avdin. Yeah, but people don't make sharecroppers. The reason why it's called a sharecropper, it's for crops, not for bathhouses. So you don't have sharecropper agreements on bathhouses, only on fields. And therefore, people will be like, yo, why is Ruvain's bathhouse open on Shabbos? It'll be a whole scandal. People won't go. It'll be a whole thing. Tanya, Reb Shimon ben Elazar almost says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, lo yaskir adam sadeu likusi. So says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, a person cannot rent out a field to a kusi. Okay. So Reb Shimon ben Elazar, a person cannot rent out a field to a kusi. Okay. Mipnei shenikris al shmo, because, if Reuven is renting out his field to a kusi, people are going to associate the field with Reuven. The kusi zeh oved bo melacha b'chul hashamoed. And the kusi is going to do melacha on chol hamoed. And of course, we don't work the fields on chol hamoed. That's going to be a problem. But that implies of oved kuchavim my shari, that oved kuchavim you can rent out the field to, as we said, dami arisa arisuse of it. Because if you see the oved kuchavim working the field, you say, he's a sharecropper. But then why don't we say the same thing by the kusi? The Reuven rented out his field to the kusi. We say, no, you can't do that because he's going to work the field on Chol Hamoed. But won't we would just conclude the same thing like we conclude with Christopher? He's a sharecropper. It's not Reuven's fault. So Yochi kusi nami arisa arisusa of it. So actually, arisusa the Reb Shimon ben Elazar leisle. So actually, says the Gemara, Reb Shimon ben Elazar, the author of this brisa, does not hold of the concept of, we'll just say he's a sharecropper. No, he doesn't hold of that. Okay. So then what's the reason why a Oved Kochavim, according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, would be able to rent out the property? He's going to work it on Shabbos. And according to Reb Shimon ben Elazar, we're not going to assume he's a sharecropper. So why is that allowed? I'll tell you why. In Oved Kochavim, you say, don't work on Shabbos, he won't work on Shabbos. Kusi nami min levitzais, but why don't we say the same thing about a kusi? Just tell him not to work on Shabbos and Yom Tov. He won't do it. And Chol Hamoed. Kusi lotzais. No, a kusi won't listen. A kusi actually, I think probably already won't work on Shabbos and Yom Tov, as we said. He's not l'chad, but Chol Hamoed is the issue. So just tell him not to work on Chol Hamoed. No, he won't listen. Damar Anagam Yonat faces, I know more than you. I know better. And he won't listen. But if that's the case, but 1 second, we had said, what did Reb Shimon ben Elazar said? Reb Shimon ben Elazar had said, don't rent out your field to a kusi because you're associated with the field and he's going to do work on Chol Hamoed. It's going to reflect badly on you. And we don't say the whole sharecropper thing. And we said because, it's going to reflect badly on you. But 1 second, it's more than that. If we're saying that the kusi is going to do melacha on Chol Hamoed and he's not going to listen, says lifnei lo siten michshol. Forget about the fact that you're associated with it. If you rent out your field to the kusi, you're enabling him to be Michal Yom Tov, Michal Samayadis, to Michal Chol Hamoed, Michal Samayadis. So that's lifnei lo siten michshol. You can't rent it out to the kusi because he's inevitably going to be Michal Chol Hamoed. And therefore, forget about the fact that you're associated with it. So again, that's my area. If he's not going to listen to you and he's going to do work anyway in Chol Hamoed, why are you saying that the issue is that Reuven's associated with the field? Forget about that. By renting out the field to the kusi, you're enabling him to do malacha on Chol Hamoed, which is lifnei v'lasitin michshol chada v'oid kamer. No, there are two reasons. One reason why not to rent out the field to the kusi is because lifnei v'lasitin michshol is going to do malacha on Chol Hamoed. The odd, in addition, because it's associated with Reuven, and because it's associated with Reuven, we don't want that association of somebody doing work in his field on Chol Hamoed. Givaldig. Well, that's Daf Chof Aleph, masechta Avodah Zarah. We learned, and tomorrow we'll finish up the first parak of masechta Avodah Zarah. Wow, feels like it's been 3 weeks. We're still in the first parak of masechta Avodah Zarah. Wow, okay, we're finally tomorrow going to finish the first parak of masechta Avodah Zarah, and today was an interesting daf, machlokes Reb Meir and Reb Yosi, about selling and renting out property in Eretz Yisrael, in Surya, in Chutz La'aretz, and yeah, also this like interesting thing about renting out also bathhouses and fields and the Sitin Michshol and Arisa Arisusa Kovid. Interesting sugyas like that. Peace out.